Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Tech Talks. My name is Faisal Bitar, and I am head of the Innovation Hub at the Arab Bank and AB Accelerator. AB Accelerator is a corporate accelerator that focuses on investing in Fintech startups from all over the globe. To learn more about our program, I'll be adding our website onto the chat, so please feel free to visit and reach out to us. As the coronavirus pandemic continues to disrupt global health and the economic system, there's an unseen threat rising in the digital space, the rise of cyber attacks. The rise of cyber attacks is preying on our increased resilience of digital tools and new working environment methods. In today's session, we'll be talking about the good, the bad, and the unknown in cybersecurity, touching upon what is cybersecurity and how do we perceive it, and understanding the importance of enterprise-wide security in times of COVID and beyond. Our speaker, Koen Maris, is the Director of Cybersecurity at PwC in Luxembourg, where he focuses on transforming ideas into new services, helping customers embed cybersecurity enterprise on a wide scale. Previously, Koen was the Chief Security Officer and CTO for large organizations, as well as served as a trusted advisor for many organizations and is an active speaker in the cybersecurity space. I'll be passing it on now for Koen to lead the conversation. If you have any questions, please add them in the Q&A, and we'll be taking that at the final segment of our presentation. Thank you and enjoy.
Okay, Koen, 3, 2, 1, go.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for the introduction, Faisal. I'm happy to join you at the live web conference from Luxembourg. You know by now that my name is Koen, so if you have a question, feel free to ask it, and I will respond to it at the end of this session. You know, the topic cybersecurity, it's a very difficult debate these days, and it's important for you guys to know what the difference is between the perception of people working in security and the reality of those people, because there's a big gap in that knowledge. And the first slide will show you clearly, this is how management feels about security today. If we talk about how do you think your CISO is doing, and they will give you some sort of image that you can see on the screen now, that people are balancing security and risks all very fine. Everything is going well, everything is in balance, and everything is fairly safe. That's at least, if we speak with board members or executives, how they feel. Of course, the reality is a lot different, because if we start digging in and we'll ask, look, what are the tools that you're using, as you can see on the next slide, and then you see that those tools are relatively poor designed. They are executed or integrated in a fashion that is not always following best practices. And moreover, if you look at the situation of COVID, for example, well, you had to hurry up and activate a lot of things. And this means that the security implementations of today are not necessarily up to the standards that we security people would expect. As you can see, the guard here, I strongly doubt that he is able to detect something, and the safe that you see, I'm even more doubtful that that will protect you from something being stolen. And that's how we see the field today and when we speak about people. And of course, if you're a regular user, you think, well, I have to work with the tools that I get. And that's of course very true. It's not necessarily up to you to make better tools, but it's up to you to report if something is wrong, of course. Now, if we go further and we ask the CISO, how do you feel about security? He will say, look, I'm just running behind the facts. I'm not able to get a hold of what's happening. I run after one incident after the other. I feel like a fireman. And sometimes that's true, but of course, security has become very important. If you look at technology, how it is perceived in the organization, and how it has become the lifeblood of your entire operations, security must be at the same level. You have to see it as something strategic, and you need to align it with your business and your IT requirements. You can't keep up with security threats that are arising today if you approach it as the same way as this guy is trying to do. So, of course, to understand that, we need to know where we're coming from and how did we get there. I mean, it's very important to look back, and I mean looking back 20, 25 years ago when internet popped up and we all had those noisy dial-up modems. Security was an whole different ballgame. Remote working was not so obvious. So we could say that at the time, we had a virtual castle to defend. We were just building something between us and them being the evil internet or the evil outside, and us being at the inside. And everything that is on the inside, we trust. Now, today, things are a bit blurry. If you use cloud services or you use a SaaS service or anything else, it's very difficult to determine where is the boundary between us and them. Where does your network stop, for example? And if there are network people looking at the conference, you can ask yourself, imagine I have to draw a network map and I have to tell us where does my local area network, if you still use the terminology, where does that stop today? That will be very difficult, especially in the situation where we're at and you're working from home. Is that an extension of your local area network? And how do you control that PC on the other side? You can from a technology perspective, but physically to control it, it will be very difficult because it's not in that safe zone, which was your castle as you knew it before. That said, we also need to think, if we look back, well, we have spent a lot of our money into preventative tools, and you know all these preventative tools. It's the firewall blocking you from going outside or coming inside. It's your anti-malware blocking you from downloading a file. It's your DLP solution preventing you to send out an email with an attachment you shouldn't. These are all, most of the time, focused on prevention, avoiding the harm to be done. And we need those tools. It blocks 90, perhaps 95% of the evil. But what we have done is we've spent too much money on those prevention tools. And I think the future will tell us that we need to be able to detect if it goes wrong, because these prevention tools work very well. But if they fail, they don't tell us. That's the big issue. For that, if they fail, we need detection tools. So we might have to shift a bit of our preventative budget to detective abilities or capabilities. And if we detect something, how are we going to respond to it? That's also very difficult today because many companies do not have incident response. They call the CISO, but that's not necessarily the one you need to call when there is a severe incident. He needs to rely on expertise in that case. So we need to look at how we are going to divide the pie in the future. Are we going to spend the majority on prevention tools and continue like that? Or are we helping users and give them the ability to detect something? And if they detect something which is unknown, how are they going to report it? That's very important. So that reflection we need to use to think about the future, because the future is, of course, changing a lot. And these changes, we are not always used to that. We are used to stand still. We keep things doing like we're used to do. How many times did you got the reply? We've always done it like that. And that's of course true. But if you're not moving, you're chained. And we shouldn't be chained. We should be moving forward because technology is pushing us in that direction. As you can see on the next slide, technology has evolved a lot. But with new technology, of course, there's an opportunity for attack. And these attacks evolve with that technology. And you can see that there is a steady rise in attacks. And sometimes there's a bit of a steeper attack vector or volume in attacks. And that's because the new technology allowed us to do so. You can see in the beginning of internet, it was relatively small number of attacks, the attacks that happened, and you can see them, they are written in red or in blue. The attacks were most of the time viruses. And you can say, well, they do harm, but it's not comparable to a real, very advanced or sophisticated attack. Of course, they ruin systems or data, and they propagate themselves very rapidly, but they're not designed to make money out of it, especially not the ones before 2000. There was a big shift in those attacks, once we could go into denial of service attacks or do DNS attacks like you can see in 2001 from Microsoft. That allowed you to trick users to go onto a website. They thought it was Microsoft, but it wasn't. And they typed in Microsoft.com, but they were redirected to something else. That, of course, gave opportunities for more sophisticated attacks. And when time moved on, we could see in 2007 that it was a big distributed denial of service attack, meaning that Estonia, in that case, was completely offline. It was sent to oblivion. It couldn't connect to the internet anymore. And of course, that also created opportunities to put something like we know today as ransomware. If you don't pay up, we'll bring you offline in the next week, next 2 weeks, etc. And then after 2007, you see also a steep spike in a serious increase in attacks, and that's because of the smartphones. iPhone came into the market around 2007, and once these smartphones became something normal and they were acquired to be used by regular users, it gave a lot of opportunities for attack again. It takes us until 2010 that we really see a real example of a very sophisticated attack, which we call today advanced persistent threats. And that's Stuxnet. And Stuxnet was designed to attack a country in the Middle East just to prevent them from making or enrich uranium. It was very well designed. It is known to be state-sponsored, so there's no secret. The only secret that there is today is we don't really know who's behind it. We can have ideas, of course. And we really don't know what the capabilities are of that software completely, because it's so well designed. And that was a big marker in history, 2010, Stuxnet. From there on, we saw more advanced persistent threat groups trying to hack companies and make a lot of money out of it. And I think the one that is most known today is the one in 2016, the Bangladesh banking hack. And luckily they made a typo. I mean, the typo that they made was difference between approximately, I don't know the numbers exactly, but transferring $80 million instead of $800 million. They made a few sloppy errors, which caught them and which allowed the system to prevent them from executing those orders. But these guys had completely access to the SWIFT environment. So that is, again, a new marker in type of attacks that we see. What we see most of the time today are the low-hanging fruit, ransomware attacks, where your data will be encrypted unless you pay up to get the recovery key and get access to your data again. But we also see the ones like HBO, and they recently had another case where hackers are able to get hold on data, which is a new movie, a new series, and if you don't pay up, we'll release it into the wild. So these are all types of attacks that we see, and I think there will be only an increase because, well, complexity of using cloud technologies, Internet of Things, where you connect everything everywhere, these smart buildings, smart cities, autonomous driving, connected cars, all these are opportunities for attack. And imagine a ransomware that is able to get control of your connected car with autonomous driving, where they say, if you don't pay up, you can't brake anymore. Stuff like that could happen in the future. And it's really time to think about how we are going to tackle these. Just to give you an idea of how the evolution of technology also creates a parallel universe, which is the evolution of the attack vectors and the attacking groups or hackers. And there might be hackers looking at it at this time, so we don't know. Anybody is a potential hacker, of course. But we also need to understand this when we think about risk. And risk is an important factor. If you're a company, you need to manage risk, of course, and you need to understand it very well. But if you look at the risk outlook given every year by the World Economic Forum, years ago, you couldn't see anything about technology on there. Cyber, nobody was discussing that. Now you can see on the slide that cyber is amongst the top 5. I mean, it's as important as economic confrontations. It's as important as extreme heat waves, for example. So if you don't take cyber serious, we could suffer any of the other ones, except perhaps extreme heat waves, unless they're able to block your aircraft from functioning in a warm country. But of course, it could lead to economic confrontations. False data, fake news, you've heard a lot about that, is as dangerous as an advanced persistent threat. So the future is not only thinking about how to block attackers, the future is also about how are we going to preserve and assure that the data we see and the information we get is the right one. That's not so easy to do so. And risk, of course, is also a very subjective matter, as you will learn throughout the presentation. Now, if you look at the next slide, it's also important to know where am I as a region. And of course, I couldn't find anything specifically drilled down to Middle East. So I took what I could find from Cisco on Middle East comparable to, let's say, global, the rest of the world. And you can see on the slide that you're not so far off. I mean, if you look at the percentage of companies getting hacked with a result of more than 500K damages, you're a bit lower than what is on the global radar. You can also see that you're a bit higher, that companies managing more than 21 vendors. So you have on average 23 as a region. But I think if we compare it, you're a good average player. That doesn't mean you're good in security. That just says something about the risks you can have and how you are doing compared to the rest of the world. And I don't know if that is a good benchmark. Let me be very honest. I don't know if you should lower your ratios, if having more than 21 vendors is good or bad. I couldn't tell you. What I do know is that you look a bit more into security alerts. Investigated security alerts, you're a bit higher than average. That might be good because that means that you have a stronger ability or capability to detect something. So that's positive. But on the other hand, I see you're also a bit higher as organizations suffering from public breach. So both could be perhaps connected in some way or another. So it's something to think about, but it's not absolute truth. And I don't like these benchmarks because we can't always see what's really behind it. What is very clear, and that's for everyone in the world, majority of companies today struggle with keeping and maintaining security staff. And as you can see, 25% of the 1 on 4 organizations say that lack of security staff is a big obstacle. If we may believe the numbers, this will only increase. It's very difficult to find good staff, and it's even more difficult to keep them in your organization because they get pulled by everyone everywhere to join a new company for a better salary, better projects, and you name it, they'll find an excuse to convince them to join their company and leave yours. So that's something you need to think about in the future if you want to build a strategic security pillar in your organization. Well, be aware that you will need to pay for it and that it will be very difficult to construct those teams. Now, something in companies is very difficult. If we talk risk in a company, we speak today about something what some say it's cyber risk. To be honest, I believe in perhaps legal risk, operational risk, and finance risks. And it boils down to those, I think. Cyber risk is just a combination of different parts of that. But we need to take risks. It's like a ship, like you see on the slide. A ship is not designed to stay in the harbor. It's like your car, it's not designed to stay in the garage all the time. You need to drive it. This is like business. If you like to move on with business, you need to take risks. Of course, you need to judge well your risks and you need to calculate those risks. Don't go out there and say, Koen said we can take all the risks we are capable or we think we are capable to manage. No, we need to measure risks. But if we measure risks, we need to be very aware that it's a very subjective matter. And I'll show you by a few slides. And of course, you can't answer me now, but just think and I'll be quiet for a few seconds and then think about it, how you perceive it. If I give you this slide and I ask you, is this a dangerous animal? Now, I know from experience that if I'm in a big room or auditorium that people, majority will say, and it's a light majority, let's say 60%, who raise their hand and they say, it's a dangerous animal. And I clearly say it's a shark. It's not a whale if the design wouldn't be very clear. It's a shark, and sharks are known to be lethal and it could be dangerous. But I tell you, it could be. Everything depends on the context. So the next slide will show you a vending machine. And this vending machine is something where you get a soda out, a can of Coke, some sweets, whatever. It's a regular vending machine, can be big, a bit smaller. And if I ask you, is this an evil machine? And I ask you, what do you think of evil in the sense of this machine? The majority of the people will say, yeah, it could be evil. You could get stuck with your arm. They find all kinds of weird things, but it's fairly simple. Of course, it's an evil machine, but as such, if I give you this without a real context, most people would say, no, it's not evil. You can't die. Yeah, you die of the sugar that you take out of it, perhaps, and things like that. Then I'll ask you to compare both. If I ask you which of the two would be most lethal, which kills most? Now, if you follow your senses, people say the shark. I mean, it's a lethal animal. If you swim around it, it could bite you. I've never seen people being bitten by a vending machine, but unfortunately, it's the other way around. More people are killed by vending machines than by sharks. And that, of course, depends the context, how you compare it. But what do people do is they put money in there. The soda can, the Coke or iced tea is not coming out of it. They start shaking the machine. The machine falls up on them. They suffer and eventually they die. That's how sad the story ends. But that's the truth about risk. Risk is a very subjective matter and you need a complete context to understand how risk works as a whole. Just trying to define risk, threats, vulnerabilities, and mitigations is not always enough. And especially if you start fiddling around with what's the impact, what's the cost, and that maybe you are able to define that. But then if we start, what's the probability? Probability is a very difficult factor in that. And I believe that you should emphasize on impact and perhaps indirect and direct costs related to that impact. But if we start fiddling around with the trigger of probability, it becomes difficult to be objective. If you think about history and the probability of malicious events happening, well, most of the severe events, the probability would have been set to 0. Just give you the example of the tsunami, 9/11, and there are many others that you think of. What is the probability? Everything depends on the context, of course. So it's something to think about when we are trying to measure risk. Impact, very important, and defining risk scenarios also very important. Probability, perhaps a bit less. And if you are very good in estimating or being a fortune teller in probability, I really advise you play lottery because you would be a high number of winners. You would be a great winner then in the future. So my advice is to stop doing risk and play Euro Millions or another lottery game. And you will be a rich man or a rich woman and enjoy the rest of your days near a seaside or at a beach. Now, another thing is, and especially in technology and security, we like to live in our comfort zones. And that's, of course, fair. But now, since March and some countries, February or January, due to the COVID crisis, we've been pulled out of our comfort zones. And very abruptly, we've been pulled out to go home working, apply social distancing, wear mouth masks, use gel, disinfect your hands 50 times a day till the skin is falling off. All those things are not within our comfort zone. And it started fairly simple, but eventually we end up all with the same rules. What is important is that if we like to change things, it's not by staying in our comfort zone. We need to step out. And I think COVID is a great opportunity to do so now and probably in the near and the longer term future. But COVID also has some disadvantages. Because we were pulled out of that comfort zone, we are now in a stage of adapting. And that doesn't go fast enough according to what economic people like to see. We don't progress fast enough because economy will slow down, and this will, of course, have a severe impact. If you look at the next slide, you see that if there is something constant and not changing, it is change. Change will always be there. And also the ignorance of people. If there is something important that I learned in the last 20 years, is that people are ignorant. If I look back now, the last 2, 3, 4 years, board members are saying, yeah, cybersecurity is important, and they put it on their agenda and they try to work on it, but it's still a very complex matter for them. It might be so, but it has been on my agenda for more than 2 decades now. And it has never, ever got less attention. It always increased, and it's not changing due to COVID now. What we see is that COVID is a serious opportunity to change the way we work, but also for attackers. And what we also tend to think is that if we talk cybersecurity or information security or IT security, we always tend to look at IT and technology to solve the problem. Not everything is solvable by a new solution. Sometimes you need to look at what you have and improve it. It's not always better to buy a new box. Sometimes you need to look at yourself and reflect upon how can I improve my process? How can I improve my policy, etc. We also think or tend to think that the solutions that we have are fail-proof. Years ago, a university did a study to find out, look, what do people do when they are unsure about something? An email they received, a file they received, a software, etc. And they asked people, where would you open that piece of software or that email? And I think close to 70 or 80% of the people said, look, if I am not sure about how safe this email is or that attachment, I'll just open it at work. They have all the tools to protect us. That says something about the user, of course, and the ignorance of the user, but that also says about the risk exposure that you have as an organization. Users rely on the security you build, and they might jeopardize your own organization just by clicking on something they thought was unsafe to use it at home, but safe enough at work. So IT is not always the solution. Now, we are in a strange situation today. We are just in that situation where our private lives and our professional lives are blended together. Some of you have not seen the office for 2 months or even more. I'm in the office today, but it's on a rare occasion that I had to be here today to make the best out of it for this presentation. But normally we have instructions to stay away. And that blend of professional and private life brings, of course, additional risks. And these are not necessarily as such security risks. We are prone to make errors, especially if you're typing and you have a baby on your lap. It could create a lot of havoc on your PC directly, but also if the baby clicks on enter and that activates the send button to the entire company, for instance, that could create a lot of issues, of course, if everybody would do that. What is also reality is if we're working at home, we most of the time mix things together. We are not focused 100% solely on our work. No, we do other things. We listen to the radio. We might look at the news at lunch. We might have lunch at our desk. We might skip lunch and start earlier working that day or stop earlier with working. All those things are important when we are mixing home working with our working or professional environment. And another thing is, and that's definitely an opportunity for social engineering, is the limited number of contacts that we have. We are losing social contact. We are also losing contact with our colleagues, which makes us prone for attack. We might not recognize that this was a phishing email or a false email claiming somebody from my team or or the team that is sitting on the opposite side of the building that I know but not good enough, and they are now asking me or requesting things that I shouldn't answer on, but I don't know anymore because I haven't seen or spoken them for 2 months. And of course, that always creates a bigger attack vector possibility, or a bigger threat landscape. And also the fact that we're not working on fixed hours. You reflect upon yourself. Who starts working at 9 a.m. precise? I don't. I mean, I get up when I get up, and then I start working when I have time to work. And that can be at 7 in the morning, and that could be at 9:30. But that also can be at 10 o'clock in the evening. And if I then get a sophisticated attack, I might not be so concentrated anymore to detect it, or not click on it, or avoid being trapped into it. And we see that COVID is a big opportunity, as you can see on the next slide. Is only by the end of March, we already had more than 60,000 domains registered with somehow the name COVID or Corona in there. And these were tagged potentially dangerous domains. And domains could be COVID19security.com something, or COVID19protection.com, stuff like that. And you trap into it, and then of course, you fall prey for attackers. And 60,000 domains only by the end of March. I didn't look up what the status is today, but it will only increase. I mean, the stakes are high for these hackers. And I think it will only increase over time. It will even be worse over time, because we will see the effects now in the upcoming months. And imagine that in the summer months, we can't travel and we have to continue to work. Our motivation will get lower. We will be sloppy. We will be less concentrated, less motivated. These are all opportunities for social engineering, and that can be done over the phone, but also by the regular technology that you use, email, Zoom, or something else. And if we look a bit further and we go into the deep and the dark web, a bit the more shady corners of the internet, and dark web is not accessible as such by a normal browser. You need to do an effort to access it. But this is the ideal hideout for people with malintentions that are there to harm you. We can see that people are actively looking how to use this opportunity for attack. And that is astonishing what we see. You can see on the black square and on the bottom of the screen, you can see that there's a student who says, look, I'm a student and I don't have anything to do now, and I would like to learn about hacking and security, and especially the hacking part. How can I use this? It's an easy bug. How can I use this to scam people and get some extra money? This is, I was flabbergasted when my colleagues came up with this, but this is what we see today on dark web. And you see there another Russian-speaking forum on darkmoney.cc. He's saying, do not waste time with this COVID-19 thing going on. Go ahead and start learning attack as much as you can. And we also see that there is an increase, a real spike in sale of hacking courses, and they are even more sharing exploits to abuse Corona-related dorks, how they can trick you in, and things like that. Even the heat map, which was made by the Johns Hopkins University, there was malware, there were websites designed to trick you to go on their heat map and then install malware. So the opportunities are enormous for these hackers, but it's also an opportunity for us to stop being ignorant and change our behavior, of course. It's not all up to them. We need to change, and we need to be able to detect when we are getting tricked into it. Now, we are using Zoom at the moment, and it's not that Zoom as such is insecure, and Zoom, in the meantime, they've done a lot of effort to improve it. But when COVID started, every company was, oh, let's go on to Zoom. Yay, it's a great tool, it works. And I think it's a great tool, it has great features, but it wasn't secure. It was at least not as secure as they were saying as it was. And today they have changed a lot, but you can ask yourself questions if you create a Zoom meeting and you have to create an encrypted channel between the client and you, why the keys are somewhere in China. Why aren't the keys on the machines trying to set up the conference, for example, things like that. There are many things to consider. These keys were generated on a remote server in China. The encryption mechanism that was initially used by Zoom was known to be very weak, so it wasn't as robust as they would claim. So you shouldn't do those things. These were basic things. As such, Zoom, of course, is not insecure, and I'm not here to tell you stop using Zoom. And contrary, if it works well for you and you're not sharing any confidential data, as I'm doing, I'm not sharing anything that is confidential, please continue to use it and enjoy it for the time that you have to use it. What is important is that if we think about all these things and security, there's still a big aspect, and that's the human factor. And we underestimate the importance of you being a human and the abilities that you have to help protect us and the organization. I mean, the majority of times we can avoid many of those attacks. If you look back at WannaCry, for example, the patch was already available 2 or 3 months before WannaCry came out. So there was a possibility in the technology part to protect you, but there was also a possibility to not click on an attachment that activated the attack within your safe boundaries, as I called it in the beginning of the presentation, your castle. So if you're unsure, don't continue. If you suspect deceit, hit delete. But having doubt is the best protection you have. If you're unsure, ask a colleague before you start clicking on something. Ask perhaps your partner. Sometimes even your kids might know more than you about it. And since you're working at home, it's a good opportunity. Look, I got this message. What do you think? Ask them. There's no harm in asking a question. Once you click delete, once you click and activate it, it might be too late. And phishing is relatively easy. And I'll show you in the last part of my presentation. You will see on the next slides. It's an example of a phishing attack we did. And of course, you can say it's forged to make it a success. No, of course not. We have phishing attacks where the success rates are even higher. Just to give you an example, and this is not the one you see on the slides, we only send an email to 1 in 5. So 20% of the employees received an email that they could win a tablet or an iPhone or something else. And what we saw is that people started forwarding because, of course, the 4 other ones, if you share a desk if you are in a desk with 5 people, the 4 other ones were, how come I didn't get that invitation? So please forward it to me. And that's, of course, normal human behavior, but you shouldn't do it. If you're unsure, don't forward it, and especially don't click on it. And you can see here, out of 2,700 emails, 13%, which is roughly 300 people, a bit more, clicked on the link. And by clicking on the link, nothing happened at that stage. You have other attacks for that, but in this case, nothing like that. And then you see that 275 people not only clicked on it, but start filling in the form. And that's worrying some. I don't know how big the Arab Bank is, for example, but you can make the calculation for yourself or the organization where you're working. If 10% does that, you can have a severe issue, a major issue on the production in short term. What is more worrying is that 4% of total staff, and it might sound very low, 4%, but it's more than 100 people in this case, clicked on it, filled in the form, and send it over. That means at that stage, they've given out their email address, their login credential, and the password. So at that stage, the hacker would be able to log on to the system. And especially if that system is in the cloud, where there's no boundary anymore between us and them, like I explained with the virtual castle. Anywhere, from anyone from anywhere could potentially log into your Office 365 account or to your Gmail account in that case. So that's something to think about. So 100 people did that. And from there on, you can think of all kinds of scenarios of attack that give you the possibility to do so. Now, this is another detailed result, but what is important, I think, for here is that you see that the majority didn't react on it. And that's, of course, positive. What I also like to highlight is that plus 300 people contacted cybersecurity. And that's what we need to do. I mean, it's better to overload them with the questions if you're unsure than be in a group that clicks on it. And I'm happy to see that we get that percentage as well, where people reach out to ask help. Of course, you can't say that it's bad what the other ones did by not reacting, and we don't expect that everybody would react if they get such an email. But it's positive to see that also people reach out to security people to ask, how can I solve this? What is this? Is this an attack? Should I reply? Shouldn't I reply? Etc. So that's also very positive, of course. And if you look, we have a bit of a graph, because this was a worldwide company, where you can see how companies responded, and the first percentage is that you clicked on the link. The second one is you fill in the form, and the last one is that you really send out the form. In some countries, it's 0%. In some, we have low numbers where people send the emails, but you can see a few worrying countries like Cambodia and Malaysia, where almost 30% of the people would fill in and send it out, which is, of course, very worrying. And we need to work on that. The difficulty in this setup is, of course, culture. I mean, why is that different? Well, these people, we know that in this case, they weren't so good in English, so they didn't understand everything what we communicated around security on beforehand. When we did the security awareness campaigns, some didn't show up, of course, and some probably were there in the conference calls, but never asked any questions and just said yes. So if you look at some of the countries, language barriers are still there, of course. And that's something we need to overcome in an international setting, which is not easy. And to be honest, I don't think that it will be very easy over conference calls. I think it would be better to see people face to face sometime to make it really clear. And it might also be better to use people from the same region to respect the culture that they are used to. So that's very important. And it's not any different in Europe than it is in the Middle East or in the Americas. Culture is an important thing to bring a message across. Culture is also an important thing if you like to exploit something, of course, as being a hacker. And of course, they use that. We always tend to think, well, the attacks come from China or Russia or the United States. Well, many of them come perhaps from there, but they still use people in the areas where they attack to get that cultural setting right. So very important. Culture is also related to security, and it's definitely related if you want to measure risk. Here, a bit of an overview, what you see, where you see that it's not only employees, and that's very important. If you remember one of the first slides, where we measured companies with more than 21 vendors on their list. That's an important measurement, apparently. It's also important to know what are your partners doing and your contractors. Are your partners and contractors aligned with the security that you have? Are your partners and contractors also aware about the security measures that you take? Because that's not always easy, of course. And how do you test that? And how do you test that with your third-party suppliers? Do they have to fulfill certain security measurements that you impose onto them? Or do you have to fulfill certain security measures that are imposed on you by them? For example, can you impose something to Microsoft when you like to use Office 365? I strongly doubt it. So it's better to adapt to their advice at the time. And if that is too low as a security measure, then you just improve according to your set of security rules. But it's very important that you measure that as well. Security is not just a job of one single person. We're all in it together. If you like to be secure in the future, you need to take care of your employees. You need to take care of your security staff, but you also need to take care about the ecosystem that you created around vendors, partners, contractors, freelancers, whatever you have in a mixed organization of today. it's very important that we are all aligned on the same security principles when we work together. And on that note, I'd like to thank you. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to read them. I'll just switch on the Zoom screen on my laptop and then I can read them and I'll answer them. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Koen. So now we'll move into Q&A. I'll start with the first question. So the first question we have is, what are...
Okay, I don't see any questions, but unless there are questions coming in, I'm happy to wait.
You should see
people are logging off or already leaving, just give me a sign.
I believe you should be seeing the first question right now. What are cyber hygiene standards that corporates should adopt in these unprecedented times?
Yeah, okay. Now, well, let me respond on that first question. Well, the biggest standard that I personally know of is the ISO 27000 standard, of course. It is a very important framework that helps you to integrate all security controls that you are required to do so, even if you're not aiming for a certification. Though the certification can help you because vendors and partners will audit you perhaps, and then you can show this. Another one is NIST. NIST is also a very good one. That's a more American-oriented approach of things. But personally, I have more experience with the ISO norm. And if you like to go a step further and align business with IT and security, you could use COBIT to manage the governance part of that. Thank you for that question. Yeah, Faisal.
Great. So second question.
Speak about protecting the castle. We see whitelisting as method to do that. What are the limitations for this? Yeah, of course, whitelisting is great, but then you have zero dynamic. I mean, if it's not listed, it doesn't work. And of course, services pop up. You see on the technology slide how technology evolves and it will only increase. So if you like a zero trust approach, whitelisting could be an option, but be aware that the cost associated to this is an administrative burden to get something on the whitelist. And then again, how do you decide? How are the criteria to decide if this site will be whitelisted or not? It's not that I'm against it, but it has definitely limitations. And if you're working from remote, not everybody likes to funnel all users to a central gateway where you could apply this whitelisting. So that's definitely something to think about. Yeah, well, you're true. I'm reading the question about COVID. It's more around phishing attacks and less about ransomware. And that's definitely true. At the moment, we see that, of course. Though we saw a few hospitals being attacked by ransomware. So I think that the ransomware is oriented more to industries today where there is a real need. I mean, if you like to create havoc, it's easy to disrupt now a hospital that would create immense havoc on countries being subject to COVID. So I think we see more of ransomware in that area, but phishing attacks are definitely the ones coming. And I think we will start to see the ripple effects now. They had to prepare as well. The examples I showed were from end of March. We are now mid-May, so I think the increase will come about now. But of course, I'm not a fortune teller and I'm relatively bad at it, so I might be wrong. When should an organizer decide that it's better off outsourcing its security ops to an MSSP? For those that don't know what an MSSP is, managed security service provider, if you like to outsource the monitoring of your virtual castle to somebody, well, when is that better? I think that all depends on the size, but there is some big aspect you need to take in mind. And I have a lot of experience in the field being an MSSP or on the other side. If you are big enough, I think level 1 and level 2 security operations you can do in your own organization. It's relatively easy to attract those people and maintain them and give them a career path in your organization. All things you need to think about. What is difficult is to keep the real forensics experts, the investigators, what we call level 3 incident responders. If you have a severe issue, I think it's better to offload that to an MSSP or somebody else that has a real CSERT service and that can help you with that, of course. Why? Because these people are scarce, and how strange it might sound, they like a lot of incidents, and preferably the one that are really complex. They like everything you don't like to be subject of. So it would be good to outsource that. If you're smaller and you cannot afford either of them, I think it's good to go for an MSSP and start slowly, gradual increase the capabilities that you like to increase and adapt your security towards it. What is important is don't let the MSSP solely decide of what should be monitored and what not. I think it should be a mutual discussion and there should be consensus on both sides. Otherwise, I wouldn't do it. Let me read the other question. What kind of specialist you need the most in your business? I mean, SOC, forensics, or something else. For example, if you are the applicant for the better chances to get a job. Those are a lot of questions. Like I said, I think it's better to, if you like to work as a job applicant into an MSSP, of course, it's more interesting if you're higher up in the food chain and you do incident response. If you're looking from an organization and you like to assess those people, it's difficult if you don't have experience in the field. So that hence my reason to stick to level 1 and level 2 and onboard them into your organization. Look how you can mutualize on resources within IT, etc. It would be a real challenge for a mid-sized company to get a forensics engineer on board with 1 incident or 2 incidents that are severe enough to get these people excited in a year. And if you suffer from those incidents, most of the time after 5, you might be out of business if you don't take care. So you need to balance it out, but I would stick to my earlier response. CSERT is something that it's best to outsource unless you're a very big company, of course. Let me read the other question. What contributes more to the cost of attacks, cultural and human behavior, or unpreparedness of a security tool? Well, I don't have real stats. I personally think we get more results by human preparedness than by using tools. Definitely the unpreparedness or the bad integration of a security tools creates what we call a false sense of security, which is, to me, the most dangerous you can have, because you think that you're safe and you're not. You think you bought a great tool and you implement it very badly. That gives you a false sense of security. In that case, I think it's better not to spend your money and think you will never be attacked. It gives you a quiet sleep at night. You can easily rest. You don't have anything to worry, and you still have your money in your pocket in case an incident comes by. But of course, I would put my eggs more in the basket of user preparedness and look at the tools that I have. Something that we need to remember is sometimes on a technology level, good is good enough. You can easily win more by leveraging on what you have and increase the capabilities of the tool you acquired 5 or 3 years ago, instead of buying new technology all the time where you don't have the time to train your staff, integrate it correctly, and get the evolution of the tool with you in your organization. So that's my view on it. You speak about protecting the castle. No, that one we had. What contributes? Yeah, we had that one.
Oh, I think this one.
No, you speak, that was whitelisting.
Okay, so they're all done.
All questions done. I'll just wait till. Yeah, we did that. What solution approach would you recommend to a large organization like us at regional level? Okay, I'll read it. What is important is make a quick diagnosis and a remediation plan. Well, that very good question. It's not easy. Of course, you get a lot of visibility these days as an organization, as the Arab bank, you're substantial. So I don't have a real clear answer on it. It's of course very important that you understand that you cannot prevent or defend. You can only detect and respond. And that's something Bruce Schneier said years ago. It's very, very important that if you have what you think is good enough on the prevention side, that you increase the capabilities on detection and response. if you have those remediation plans, you still can suffer from a severe attack, but the impact and the damages it causes will be far less than if you're unprepared and you don't have a remediation plan. So the time has come to think about it. Do I think I can block everything out? No, those days are over. We need to accept that hackers will infiltrate, and then we need to prepare ourselves. How are we going to detect it? And what do I do as a response? So these remediation plans the person was speaking of are critical. And those remediation plans go according to your structural organization. So you have level 1s, level 2, and there need to be an escalation process. And eventually you might even reach out to a specialist company or a company like ours where you ask incident responders to do a root cause analysis at the end. So that's very important to take with you. Both are equally important, of course. You can't have a remediation plan without the resources behind it. If you just have it on paper, when the incident comes by and you pick up the phone and you call companies, I really doubt that they will be able to send people over, because most of the time they have long-term engagement with other companies that allows them or that gives them the priority to claim those resources from those specialist companies. Any other question? No? Then I'm done for today. Thank you very much. I hope you found it useful. If there are any questions afterwards that pop up into your mind, please send them to Fejal, and I'm pretty sure he will forward them to me. Thank you very much, and bye-bye.
Great. Thank you, Koen, for this very insightful session.
Thank you.
I want to thank everyone as well who attended, and please stay tuned for future sessions. Thank you.